If I hadn't have been 66 years old and had a $105 social security check coming in every month, I don't know what I would have done. It wasn't a matter of giving up, it was a problem of what to do next. These are the words of Colonel Sanders at his lowest point in life. While trying to sell franchises of his delicious chicken business, he was rejected by more than 1,000 restaurants. Nobody believed in him, but with such confidence in his recipe and idea, he made Kentucky Fried Chicken one of the most successful fast food chains over the next decade. It became so famous that he opened 600 new stores within about 7 years. No sales team, nothing, just a winning recipe. Restaurant owners would now hear about KFC and line up to be a part of franchising some of the best chicken you could get your hands on. But today is a completely different story. KFC's revenue has declined by almost 40% in the last 10 years, and its stores in lucrative markets like the US are rapidly declining. The crispy golden chicken, filled with Colonel's 11 herbs and spices, has become soggy and greasy with little to no resemblance of the original taste. Don't believe me? Take a trip to your nearest KFC and rate it for me here in the comments down below. If you look at Reddit or Trustpilot, the forums are filled with people talking about how bad it has gotten. So what happened to KFC? How did it go from being actually finger-looking good to becoming the last resort among other chicken spots? Let's dive right in. The story of KFC starts in Salt Lake City, Utah, with its founder Colonel Sanders, long before it was called KFC. So it's the 1930s, and the US is going through the Great Depression. Sanders is already 40 and hasn't achieved much in life. After working odd jobs for most of his life, he started running a Shell gas station. While working here, Sanders and his known temper once shot a business rival in a gunfight over a sign. You heard that right, over a sign. That's our fun fact of the day. But anyways, to make some extra money, Sanders decided to make meals for his customers from the back room, given that he was a skilled cook. Initially, fried chicken wasn't on the menu, as it took about 30 to 35 minutes to prepare. But Sanders loved cooking and used to mess around with recipes. Pressure cookers were also getting famous around this time. He decided to try cooking chicken on it, and believe it or not, he had a breakthrough. The problem was, before the pressure cooker, he couldn't make chicken fast without compromising the taste. But after these experiments, he found a way to cook it in 7 to 8 minutes while still keeping that delicious taste. This is when Sanders discovered his famous Colonel 11 herbs and spices. This allure of a secret recipe proved to be one of KFC's biggest selling points later down the line. And as you guessed, it was an instant hit. Sanders' main customers were travelers, and they absolutely loved it. People came from other states just to try the famous chicken. By 1935, he had built such a reputation that the governor of Kentucky gave him the honorary colonel title. Although Sanders served in the military briefly, the title had nothing to do with it. But Sanders used the title anyway, and used it to market KFC perfectly. By 1939, he had a massive 142-seat restaurant, and it looked like he had finally made it to the big leagues. But soon, a tragedy struck. His restaurant caught a massive fire, and everything was destroyed. By then, he had saved up a decent amount and decided to rebuild it. But when it was finally done, World War II broke out, and people were traveling much less in that area. He had to close down the restaurant and move to a new location. This time, he chose a very popular highway in North Coburn, Kentucky. Since his chicken was so good, this restaurant was an instant hit also. It too lasted till the 1950s. The US started building the I-75 interstate highway, which bypassed his area completely. This meant much fewer people traveling through there, and once again, the business dried down. Sanders had even incurred debt for this restaurant, and after a few years, he sold it for a loss. So at the age of 65, he had zero savings and no income source. He was left with a social security check worth $105 a month. But for Sanders, age was really just a number. Nothing could stop the ice that ran through his veins. He was an innovator, and failing was not on the menu. Sanders soon had a brilliant idea of what to do next, something that defines modern KFC: franchises. Now, franchising is big these days, but remember, it was the 1950s. Franchising was a very unknown concept. McDonald's was one of the few companies that were experimenting with it, and Sanders decided to franchise his chicken instead of opening his own restaurant. So he took a bunch of pressure cookers and went on a search worldwide. Since franchising was such an unknown idea, no one was ready to do it. Sanders approached more than 1,000 restaurants, and every single one of them rejected him. He even offered to cook the chicken for free for a few weeks. If the customers loved it, the restaurant could choose to franchise. But even then, no one seemed interested. Remember, the man was 65 and traveling non-stop to do this. Talk about trusting the process. After 1,000 restaurants, Sanders finally got a break. A restaurant owner in Utah named Pete Harmon loved the chicken and decided to include it in the menu. Luckily, he had a chain of restaurants and added it everywhere, technically making these chains the first KFC. And as you guessed it, it was an instant hit. Sales tripled after he introduced Colonel's Chicken, and by late 1950, Sanders had finally made it. He didn't need to go on long trips and convince restaurant owners to be a franchise. Instead, he was approached by owners everywhere to include it in the menu. Colonel didn't share the recipe with anyone, and this secrecy made more people want to try it. By 1964, KFC had more than 600 locations and didn't even have a sales or marketing team. An ambitious 29-year-old lawyer named John Brown saw this and realized the gold mine Sanders was sitting on. If he opened 600 locations without proper marketing, how big could it be with proper marketing and branding? Sanders was also in his 70s and somewhat tired of running a huge business, but he didn't want to sell as he thought John would mess up with the recipe. John convinced Sanders he wouldn't change anything and that Sanders could be involved in the day-to-day affairs. John convinced a venture capitalist, Jack Massey, to put on the money up front and bought the business for $2 million. Now, many people think this is when KFC started declining, but it's not true. John was true to his word. He didn't change the recipe much, and Sanders was actively involved in promoting KFC. He did, however, start spending massively on advertising and building a brand image. The restaurants were rebranded with a distinctive red and white striped color pattern, and mansard roofs with cupolas. Sanders was a great showman who knew how to incite emotions. He used to go on TV ad campaigns and instantly boost sales. In John Brown's own words, every time we got him on television, franchises sales jumped 10% or more. He was a great showman. By 1971, John had made KFC one of the largest food chains in the world and sold it for $284 million to Hublin Inc. Sounds amazing, right? Wrong! This is where things started to go terribly wrong for KFC. John had agreed not to mess with Sanders' recipe, but Hublin didn't give a damn. They wanted to streamline everything and expand as fast as possible. Sanders' recipe wasn't suited for this, so they made some massive changes. For instance, the gravy was changed to be a much cheaper version that could be mass-produced. The chicken wasn't marinated for a long time, nor dipped in flour paste before cooking it. When Sanders visited KFC after these changes, he was outraged. He was very public and vocal about his criticisms, going as far as saying, "The gravy tastes like wallpaper paste, and the chicken was nothing but a dry and soggy ball." So the decline of KFC isn't something recent. It's just gotten worse and worse over time. This led to a series of nasty lawsuits between KFC and Sanders. Sanders even opened up a competing restaurant named Claudia Sanders, the Colonel's Lady Dinner House. When everything was settled, he got $1 million and had to rename his new restaurant. To this day, the restaurant is operational and is the only place where you can get the original KFC. Crazy, right? Anyone here ever tried this place? By the late 1970s, Sanders was getting increasingly sick and died of pneumonia in 1980. KFC continued to expand globally, and although not the original taste, people liked it. But cracks were already showing up in KFC. Sanders was the visionary and the marketing genius that made KFC so popular in the first place. As KFC's chief marketing officer said, KFC without Colonel Sanders had become like Apple without Steve Jobs. The branding was very inconsistent. New items on the menu were introduced frequently without any thought, and overall, the food was a hit or miss. Good in some locations, horrible in others. But the management didn't care much, as they were expanding rapidly around the world. By 1994, KFC had 5,000 locations in the US and 9,000 locations worldwide. By this time, KFC wasn't too great, but it wasn't bad either. But this is where the management started to completely lose it. They simply didn't know how to market and brand KFC. They tried bizarre advertising, like featuring Colonel Sanders rapping to appeal to the younger audience, removed a lot of original menu offerings, and made a logo with cartoon Sanders. In 2006, they decided global fame wasn't enough and advertised to aliens in the UFO enthusiast tourist destination city of Rachel, Nevada. To do so, they made an 87,500 square foot Colonel Sanders out of tile in the desert. I had to double check this one. It's true. While this was happening, the production process was getting more and more standardized, removing every bit of original taste. Its worst decision came in 2007, when the management decided to replace its lard oil with trans fat-free oil. Sure, it was healthy, but no one goes to KFC for eating healthy. You know why I'm here. More cholesterol, please and thanks. KFC assured customers this wouldn't affect the taste, but they were wrong. People were outraged and hated it so much. By this time, KFC had expanded to almost every country, so there wasn't much room to grow. grow. You see, while the revenues were increasing due to the sheer number of new locations, revenue per store was stagnating or even declining all this time. So its revenue finally started to go down in the late 2000s, and the number of stores in profitable locations like the US started declining. Everything just got worse from here. The service was terrible, the chicken started to feel drier and drier, and there was no hint of 11 herbs and spices in the chicken. Instead, it was an overwhelming amount of salt. Now, there are a lot of small reasons why people hate KFC, and Reddit is filled with these. From its terrible service to unhygienic stores, everyone has something they hate, but it's mostly due to the taste. Even till the mid-2000s, KFC wasn't too bad, but increased standardization and obsession with efficiency have made the actual food really bad. In 2006, KFC realized this after the revenue dropped for 7 years consistently and came up with a plan to recolonize KFC, but it was a flop too, as they didn't change the actual recipe by too much. They just plastered tons of Colonel's pictures in the stores and made slight changes to the recipe. Yep, that's literally what they did. Today, KFC is declining rapidly. It had a revenue of $12 billion at its peak, which is down to $6 billion today. When you consider inflation, it's even worse. Competitors like Chick-fil-A have taken over, and KFC stores look quite empty. It has become a soulless corporation after its founder passed. Maybe the management will realize this and actually try to change for the better. Who knows? You can dream. So what do you think about KFC? Comment that down below, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this. Catch you guys on the next episode. Intellectual Digest out.